Good morning, thanks for joining. My name is Daniel and I'm employed at Console, and I've written a monitoring plugin to check Vsphere. The first question you may ask is, why am I doing that? We already have these three guys. The answer is very simple. VMware has deprecated the Perl SDK and the Ruby SDK and the .NET SDK, and all of the existing plugins are written in Perl. So customer got scared, and that's why Check Vsphere was born. It uses the Python library because that's the only library left on this list that's not deprecated and is reasonable. The other one is Java. And so I've written it in Python, and I'm using this library. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I just call it the Python SDK. You can get it on GitHub. I don't have a release yet. I've just made an alpha release, I think 2 days ago. But I also have already a lot of documentation. And once it is stabilized, you will be able to install it via pip. Yeah, I will just show you around what we have currently. The anatomy of the command line options are a bit different from check VMware ESX. Basically, what I'm doing is I read the check VMware ESX source code and try to replicate all the checks that are in there, but only if it makes sense. The anatomy is a bit different. So you have this check Vsphere script, and it has some subcommands like about or host runtime or perf or snapshots, something like that. Yeah, let's look at the first one, the about command. It's just connecting to the API and gathering some version information. It's basically a check if the API is answering. So you may use it as a service dependency for all the other checks, for example. I think you have to scroll here a bit. So it's yeah. Then there's the media command. It checks for the it searches for VMs that have CD-ROMs or floppies attached to it. And if so, then it reports a critical state. That's also something we had in check VMware ESX. Then we have the host runtime check. That's basically if you're used to check VMware ESX, that is select runtime and subselect select runtime and subselect one of these modes. I call them modes here. So subselect con or subselect health. And it does basically the same thing as check VMware ESX. So I just replicated all of these. What I didn't do yet is the black and white listing of stuff. That's not implemented yet, but it will come. The temperature sensors already. The temperature sensors are also checked with the health here. But if you call the temp mode, you also get the performance data for the temperature sensors. Next one is the snapshots. It's just a word on the command line options. I'm using Vsphere. VMware has a GitHub repository called the Python SDK community samples, and there is a collection of command line options. I'm just reusing them most of the time. So -s and -u and so on comes from this library, because there's also a help text available for them. And I just add the stuff I need. You don't see a password here. The password is passed via the environment, but there's also a command line option if you want. Yeah. So you can check for snapshots that are too old or too young or too less or too many snapshots. So I'm using the monitoring guidelines here, so you can deal with these guys, with this tilde, colon things. And probably what you've seen so far is you're probably already familiar with, and that is a novelty. Check VMware ASX has a lot of checks that go to performance data. Vsphere has some kind of time series database in it, and you can get values out of it. For example, select CPU and sub-select usage. It maps that to a metric in Vsphere and compares the thresholds against this metric. And the list is finite. Yes, there's a long list of things that you can check. And I built a generic way to gather the metrics. So now you can check all the metrics that are in Vsphere. I think I have a list of them. If I can move, yeah. So there's this list metrics command that just lists all the metrics. It looks like this. So you have CPU usage average, for example. And this list is very long. It's about, I don't know, 600 things. There's also documentation for them. It's all available in the API. So if the documentation doesn't say very much, it's not my fault. It's Vsphere's fault. And you need this guy here to pass to the script. The metrics are ordered are grouped by some category. In this case, it's the CPU category, or we have down there a memory category somewhere here. The second part is the actual metric, and the last part is they call it roll-up type. It's some kind of aggregation. So you always ask for an interval, and the last thing gives you the average over all measurements in this interval, for example.
It's from the quick stats part, right?
Excuse me?
It's from the quick stats part.
Quick
statistics, aggregated statistics in VMware.
It's from the performance counters that are available in the metric.
Performance counters are from the aggregated data. There's a note in the development guide. You should not use it for monitoring. That was the reason why I have kicked it out.
No, I'm actually doing the same thing as you do in my code. So I've used the same API calls just with Python.
Okay, then I was wrong, because quickstep should not be used.
Okay. I will look after it. Yeah, these are all the counters we have available. Let's go back to the slides. So there's this maintenance state. So if the host, it's only available with Vim type host system. If a host is in maintenance, then you can emit OK or warning or something. And the other two options here are Vim type. That's the type of object you want the metrics for. So if you want to check an ESX host, then this will be host system, or you can check metrics for virtual machines, then this is virtual machine. Or a data center may also have metrics or some storage stuff. In the documentation, there's a link to all the available values. And the Vim name is basically the name of the object. So if you have host system, if you have Vim type host system, then Vim name is just the host name. Or if you have a virtual machine, then it's the name of the virtual machine. And in case of the data center, it's the name of the data center, and so on. And then the other part is the performance counter. The performance counters, you can get the value from the list metrics. And I have also, here in the documentation, I have, this is the documentation, by the way. So there's this perf command here. I have to make this smaller, right? So there you have some explanation and some examples, and down there is the Rosetta table. So if you're used to check VMware ASX, then you find how you can use it with the perf command. But you're free to use any perf counter you want. These are just the one I found in the check VMware ASX script. So there's also the Vim types that are available for this metric. So I hope that helps. And then there's another new thing, that is the performance instance, the perf instance. I found a bug in check VMware ASX for some metrics. When you query a metric, so this perf instance has two special values. That's the empty string and the asterisk. And the empty string is an aggregation over all instances, but it's not available everywhere. It's just there when there is only one instance, or if that aggregation makes any sense. For example, in CPU checks, it makes a lot of sense, but not so much with disk checks, because disks differ. There it's not available, and what check VMware ASX was doing, it queries for the asterisk, and then just returns the first one it found, and omits all the other ones. So if you checked your disks, or if you thought you checked your disks with check VMware ASX, then you only checked one disk and ignored all the other one for the last 10 years probably. And that's why we have this parameter. It defaults to the empty string. So you get the aggregation if it's available, and if it's not, you will get an error message, and in that case you should try the asterisk to see which instances are there, and you can also specify an instance. So yeah, here are some examples for these performance counters. So here I have some more examples. So here's a thing with this performance instance. We have a disk check. We check the total latency, and I have here perf instance asterisk, and then I get all the disks, and you get also the performance data for all the disks. Yeah, I can't help, the disks have these stupid names, so I have to display them. And you can also just check this one disk, for example. So this is the new stuff for the performance counters. And now I just hate a bit on the Vsphere API to make it a bit entertaining. So the Vsphere API is very over-engineered. And in the community examples, this is an example from the community examples, and it just finds you a VM with a specific name. And what you have to do is you have to iterate. You have to iterate through the data center and some folders and so on. And then at the end, you get your VMs, you get a VM list, and you iterate through this list. And then you ask every entry for its name. And if it is what you searched for, then you just do something with it. And the problem is, this VM object, it's some kind of object. This object is empty, it doesn't know its name. So if you access this attribute, it makes an HTTP call. And if you have 1,000 VMs, then this is pretty slow a bit, because on average you make 500 HTTP requests. There's a solution to that. But the solution is not simple. I would expect that you have some kind of search function in the API, but the Perl SDK had this nice find entity views function, and that's actually the exact thing I wanted. I search for virtual machines that are powered on, that belong to this host, and I want also the name and runtime attributes prefetched. So if I access this attribute, no extra HTTP call is made. This is what this function is doing, and unfortunately in the Python SDK it's not available. It's just not there, so I had to write it myself. So I read the source code of the Perl SDK and ported everything line by line. This is the find entity views. First I had to create some property spec to which properties I want to fetch. And then I need a filter spec. So I pass the property spec to the filter spec, and the entity where I want to begin my search, for example, this can be a host, and everything beyond this host is searched for, or if I omit that, then it's just the root folder. And once I have this filter spec, I pass it to the property collector and retrieve contents, and that finds all the stuff for me. And although it is a filter spec, it's not filtering for the attributes, for the can I go back here? Yeah, it doesn't filter for this filter. It's just filters for the view type. So the filter for the actual filter I have to do myself, and that is what happens after this object contents. But it's just a for loop and some if and else and so on. And then there's this get search filter spec. So let's go into that. It looks pretty simple. I get some traversal specification and an object specification. I put the traversal spec in there, and then I put this object spec into the filter spec. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've just translated every Perl call into a Python call. And then I return the filter spec, and yeah, we're finished, right? So, but there's this guy. So, and that's just hilarious. So, here are the dragons. We have a traversal spec and a selection spec. And what I'm doing here, I have to specify a way how the API should traverse its tree. So I have a traversal spec to traverse the resource pool path and find all the resource pools. Then I have to extend this thing with some other specs that are not defined yet, but we define it here. And there's another traversal spec for some other folder, and one for another folder that has to be extended with itself to make recursion possible. And then I have to do this traversal spec to find compute resources beyond the host and the host folder and so on. And then we have this visit folder thing. It's not defined yet. It's defined at the end. So we go to the network folder. You probably can make it, if you just are looking for virtual machines, then you can make it simpler. But I want to be able to search for anything without writing a new traversal spec every time. And that was in the Perl code, and I've just translated it. And after I translated it, I found someone who already did this. So yeah, so another one, and then I have to extend this visit folder thing with all the things we have defined. Then we put everything into an array and return that beast. And with that thing, we are able to search for stuff in Vsphere. That's it.
Yourself go and get funky. Let yourself go and get funky.